You'll see another system that the Spanish were using to force Native Americans to work, and this was the mita. Now, the Incan Empire had a practice that required Incan citizens to perform service for the state on a rotating basis. So the Spanish adopted this Incan practice and formalized it in their colonial holdings. Essentially, a Spanish settler would apply to one of the Spanish administrators, a viceroy, a member of the audiencia, for Native American workers, and he would have to explain how these workers on his plantation or in his mines or on his ranch would be providing the area with essential goods. So the practice of the mita, if the settler was given this access to laborers, would require Native American laborers to work 2 to 5 weeks, 3 to 4 times a year, and workers were supposed to be paid for this labor. But there were a lot of abuses. The mita was most commonly used in the mines, especially in areas around Peru and Mexico. And the conditions of mines in this period of time for Native American laborers were not good. You saw all sorts of abuses. People were beaten if they didn't meet certain quotas. Native American workers were working far underground in areas that had been dug out. People suffocated. There were cave-ins, and there were no protections for them. We also had the issue of mercury. Mercury was mined because it was used to get the pure silver out of the ore, and we have Native American laborers who were forced to either mine or else help purify the mercury. And mercury is very poisonous, so laborers who are exposed to mercury over long periods of time, or else in a very direct gaseous form, could die. Thinking about, too, the pay, there are lots of abuses where mita workers didn't get paid. Usually, the overseer or the supervisor who was responsible for paying them was somebody of mestizo background, so somebody who was bi or multi-ethnic would take that supervisor, be granted that supervisory position. The Spanish settler would send the pay to this mestizo supervisor, but, both the owner of the mine and also the supervisor could skim off the top. And if the Native American laborer tried to demand his pay, usually he was told, well, you can stick around and keep working if you so desire, and maybe you'll get paid next time. But the Native Americans laborers couldn't take a case to court, so they had no legal means to ensure that they were paid. Now, the mita, because it took basically all members of a community away for up to 5 weeks at a time, really devastated communities in large. If you'll think families would be left without their male contributors of labor, perhaps during a really important harvest or planting time. So the mita system was actually reformed by the Spaniards over time because they recognized this. They didn't want their whole source of labor to be wiped out. So, for instance, in 1601 and 1609, they passed laws that said you couldn't take more than a quarter of the workers from each district at a time. So they tried to rotate it and not take the entire community's supply of labor so that the community could continue to exist. Now, the mita officially continued until 1820, but what you'll see in both the encomienda and the mita system is that over time, Native American populations were so devastated by disease and these harsh labor conditions that by the 1800s, almost no one is left to work in them. And especially in the Caribbean, but it's also happening in other parts of Latin America, we're going to get these Native American laborers replaced by African slaves. So the next slide shows you what the Spanish crown was getting out of this. Initially, the Spanish king, King Ferdinand, in the early 1500s, was telling the conquistadors to send him gold. There's a quote attributed to him on July 25th, 1511, where he says, "Get gold, humanely if you can, but at all hazards, get gold." And this quote was actually referring to the Caribbean, but the more long-term sources of gold, and especially silver, were Peru and Mexico. And the Spanish crown set up a system whereby mine owners had to pay 1/5 of the estimated cost of all the silver and gold that they were taking out of mines in the Americas to the Spanish crown. So the tax rate was 20% off the top, and that went to the Spanish crown. This was known as the quinto, and we'll connect this to later processes in Europe, because what this does is make the Spanish crown really rich and contribute to the development of absolute monarchs. Another thing that's happening here is we're getting new areas of urbanization. So both the Incan Empire and the Aztec Empire had already had cities, but now the cities are located in these mining regions. And one example of this is the city surrounding Potosi, which was the largest vein of silver in the Spanish Americas in the mid-1500s. And this began to be mined on a very large scale in the 1580s. And 20 years later, it had a population already of 150,000. So we see a new pattern of urbanization in this area.